the moment. Philemon, or Philemon, some people like to call it.
Philemon, I think.
Philemon does suits me, but just before Hebrews, and one of the smallest books in the Bible. I think you'd agree.
So small it's to spit out my Bible at the moment.
Yeah, it is hard to find sometimes. Just before Hebrews.
Hebrews, James.
And just such an interesting book because it's kind of like a personal letter, whereas of course a lot of Paul's other letters are sort of letters to churches, and yet this has a very sort of small group of people. Really, three main personalities involved in the letter, although there are others people mentioned in it, of course. But the three main personalities are someone called Onesimus, who is a slave, Philemon, who is his master, and of course the Apostle Paul, who is, if you like, the sort of intercessor in this situation. And I'll just give you a brief sort of overview of what takes place, because we want to really deal with the actual text itself. But the situation is this, that Philemon has a slave called Onesimus. Onesimus runs off and runs away to Rome, where he encounters the Apostle Paul. Under the Apostle Paul, or under the gospel, he gets saved, becomes a Christian, and Paul tells him, you've got to go back to your master. So he goes back to Philemon, who dwells in Colossae, like as in the letter to the Colossians. That's where he lives. He's an eminent citizen of that place, and so Paul sends him back with this letter, and that's basically it. And it's really the words that Paul uses, the arguments that Paul uses, and so on, and the way in which he entreats Philemon that we're going to concern ourselves with. And anything that comes up out of the text, I'm going to kind of throw it open and ask people questions and stuff. And so as we're going through it, if something occurs to you, I'm going to be fairly open with it, and so if a conversation is sparked off by one part of it which is not directly involved in the text, if it's of value, we'll let it go and let it flourish, and if it's just going on a bit, I'll try and bring things back in, and we'll concern ourselves again with the text. So what I thought we'd do, we'll just read it all the way through, because it's quite small. It's only about 25 verses. And there's how it was 1, 2, 3, 4,
No, it's
5.
really different. Sorry,
Probably PlayStation.
Because yours is the NRSV.
I know, but I completely lost you. I was like, I'm trying to follow you, and I completely
Well, the King James, when it says bowels, it's talking about the heart. It's because we say the heart because it's that which is inside your body. So they say, well, bowels, that's inside your body. That's the centre of who you are. That's what it's saying. So it just sounds a bit comical to the kind of modern ears.
Alright, something right.
But the NRSV is actually...
I totally did not like.
Although the NRSV is readable, it's actually quite long in all places.
So I actually don't find out until you've done it for a bit.
Yeah, no.
It was quite fine. So
It was good because I was struggling on the way.
yeah, you got out of pronouncing that. I finished it for you, but I don't think anyone really heard it over the sound of the carolers. So back to Philemon then. So that's the whole of the book of Philemon. I say three main people involved there: Onesimus, Philemon, and the Apostle Paul. Other people are mentioned, of course. Timothy gets a mention. Aphia is Philemon's wife. Archippus is their son. And the first bit that I thought was interesting, really, as you read through it, is verse 2 here, where it says to our beloved Aphia and to Archippus, our fellow soldier, and to the church in thy house. So Philemon is a Christian, Archippus, his son, it would seem, is also a Christian, and Archippus has a church that meets in his house. So it's a house church, a home church, or whatever you want to call it. And it has been suggested that Philemon is like the minister, if you like. It just happens to be in Archippus's house. I mean, I don't know whether you could draw that out of those few verses. But what do you think about the idea, the concept of a church in somebody's house? It's interesting we've got you here, Paul, because you've been to a church that is largely in someone's house. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it scriptural? Should everyone be doing that, or does it just not matter? Your thoughts, gentlemen and ladies.
Well, I mean, I've read that it's the New Testament pattern, that actually all churches started in houses. I don't know how true that is, but there seems to be a movement these days. I don't know whether it's to do with fashion, but certainly in places like China, the house church movement is very big, although that's probably to do with the fact that the authorities make it difficult to have buildings. But certainly I would worry about these mega churches, that people are being pastored correctly and properly. So I would have thought an intimate house church is a good place to begin. But I think you can end up being a bit legalistic, can't you, and saying, oh, you should only have it in a home, which I have heard that said.
There's a whole movement, the house church movement.
Is it, right?
Yeah. Although I don't mean it's like a denomination. I mean it is a whole.
Yeah, I've read
some people. Yeah, they're very strong.
Yeah, a guy called Frank Viola, I think, is part of this movement. I've read some of his stuff, and I understand it's trying to go back to the authentic first century pattern. But it's whether then you start becoming legalistic about it. You see.
So you're saying it doesn't really kind of matter. It's not wrong, but it's not necessarily the only way to do things.
Well, Jesus said, "Where two or more are gathered, there I am in, their midst." So he doesn't say where; he just says that they're gathered. So, I mean, you could get pedantic and say they met in homes, like Aquila and Priscilla. They did the same thing.
Yes.
But I don't see anything that says for definite, thou shalt meet in a home.
Anybody else got any thoughts on that?
I think, as I read the New Testament, that's how they did it. But there isn't anywhere where it says that we're doing it this way because this is the only way. So I think I'd probably agree with what Matthew said about that. But I have heard it said that that wasn't the only way they did it in the New Testament, because sometimes it talks about the meeting in synagogues and things like that. But I got the impression that when I read it, I get the impression that they did, but that wasn't their kind of, this is our church meeting. That was kind of, we're going into the synagogues and kind of, because we get an opportunity to hear Moses preached and then give our own slant on, give the, this kind of true gospel.
Yes.
Rather than, they were meeting in a building and calling it a kind of Christian synagogue.
Yes.
And also, I think the meaning of the word synagogue can mean just a gathering anyway.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the bit that kind of, when I first seriously considered the sort of house church as a that's the way it should be done kind of thing, was reading in Acts 2. Acts 2:46, and they continued daily with one accord, obviously referring to the church. They continued daily with one accord in the temple and breaking bread from house to house. There's that breaking bread from house to house, that they met in each other's houses. But as Paul's pointing out, it also says continued daily with one accord in the temple.